Airport cameras never recorded what happened in Terminal C. They didn't capture the moment a young woman raised her hand, not to wave, not to ask, but to signal. They didn't capture the way one man noticed when no one else did. And they didn't capture the truth that the most dangerous thing in that terminal wasn't the man following her. It was the man who understood her. Roman Vale did not believe in coincidence. He believed in patterns. In the way fear tightened shoulders. In the way silence spoke louder than screams. At 36, Roman had learned to read danger the way other men read headlines. Quickly, quietly, without letting it touch his face. The airport pulsed with motion, rolling suitcases, boarding calls, lives passing inches apart without ever colliding. Roman sat still, dark suit immaculate, laptop open to a document he hadn't read in minutes. That's when he felt it. Not sound. Not movement. A girl 2 seats away. Early 20s. Bruised cheekbone. Hands clenched around a backpack like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She didn't look at him. She didn't ask for help. She simply lifted her hand, just enough. And Roman understood something instantly. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was asking to be seen. The heavy oak door to Roman's study didn't creak. It clicked with a finality that made Alara's lungs seize. She remained frozen against the mahogany desk, her fingers still hovering inches from the burner phone she'd tucked into the hollow of a decorative vase. Roman didn't move from the doorway. He stood in the shadows, the amber glow of the fireplace catching only the sharp line of his jaw and the glint of his signet ring. The silence stretched until it became a physical weight, pressing the air out of the room. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't lunging. That was the problem. Roman Rossi was most dangerous when he was still. "You have a habit of looking for things that don't want to be found, Alara," he said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent a chill straight down her spine. "I was just looking for a pen," she lied, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. He stepped into the light. He had shed his suit jacket, his white sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark ink of the tattoos that climbed his forearms, reminders of a life built on bones and silence. He walked toward her with a predator's grace, closing the distance until she could smell the expensive tobacco and cold rain clinging to his wool vest. He didn't grab her. Instead, he reached past her, his hand disappearing into the vase. When he pulled his hand back, the small, silver flip phone sat in his palm like a smoking gun. "This is a high-frequency signal, Alara, encrypted, the kind used by people who want to dismantle everything my family has spent 3 generations building." He tossed the phone onto the desk. It landed with a dull thud. "Who are you talking to?" "It isn't what you think," she whispered, backing away until her hips hit the edge of the window frame. Outside, the sprawling Rossi estate was a fortress of iron and stone, guarded by men who took orders without question. She was trapped in a gilded cage, and the lock had just turned. Roman leaned in, bracing his hands on the desk on either side of her, pinning her in place. "I brought you here because I thought you were the only clean thing left in this city. I gave you my protection. I gave you my name." His eyes, usually a calculated gray, burned with a dark, volatile hurt. "But my associates, they aren't as sentimental as I am. If they find out there's a leak in this house, I won't be able to stop what they do to you." The threat wasn't from him, it was for her. The realization was worse than the fear. He was telling her that her life was no longer in his hands alone. The council, a group of ruthless men who viewed Roman's sudden soft spot for Alara as a liability, were already looking for a reason to eliminate her. She had just handed them the rope. "Roman, please," she breathed, her hand instinctively reaching for his chest. He caught her wrist, his grip firm but not bruising. He leaned down until his lips brushed her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "The signal was traced, Alara. My brother's men are downstairs right now. They think a mole is in the house. If I go out there and tell them I found nothing, I'm a traitor. If I tell them the truth, you're a ghost." He pulled back, his gaze searching hers, looking for a confession she wasn't ready to give. The stakes had shifted from a game of secrets to a matter of survival. You have 10 minutes to tell me why that phone is in my house, Roman said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, final tone. Before the men at the door stop asking me for permission to enter. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the study sounded like a hammer against an anvil. Roman didn't move. He simply watched her, his gray eyes stripped of their warmth, replaced by the terrifying, analytical stillness that had earned him the throne of the Rossi Empire. He didn't demand an answer again. He didn't need to. He was a man who understood that silence was the most effective extractor of truth. Alara felt the walls closing in, the air thick with the scent of his cologne and the ozone of an approaching storm. She watched his pupils track the frantic pulse at the base of her throat. He wasn't acting with the impulsive rage his brother, Dante, would have shown. Roman was calculating the cost-benefit analysis of her betrayal. He was weighing her life against the stability of his syndicate, and the terrifying part was how evenly the scales seemed to balance. He walked to the sideboard, his movements fluid and unnervingly calm. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass, the ice clinking with a rhythmic, steady chime. He didn't offer her any. Instead, he took a slow sip, his gaze never leaving her face. This was his old pattern, the one the streets whispered about. Roman Rossi didn't strike first. He let his enemies unravel themselves in the vacuum of his presence. "You're wondering if I've already called them," Roman said, his voice a low velvet rasp that cut through the silence. "You're wondering if Dante is standing behind that door with a garrote, or if I'm waiting for you to give me a reason to lie to him." Alara took a trembling step forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "Roman, I'm not who they think I am. I'm not trying to hurt you." "Then who are you trying to save?" he countered, the question sharp as a blade. He set the glass down with a soft clack that made her flinch. "Because every second you waste on a lie, the more certain it becomes that I have to treat you as an asset to be liquidated rather than a woman." He stopped, the word loved hanging invisible and heavy in the air between them, too dangerous to speak. The power dynamic had shifted. She was no longer his guest or his lover. She was a variable in a lethal equation. Roman moved toward the window, looking out over the dark expanse of the estate. Below, the headlights of 2 black SUVs cut through the gloom, sweeping across the gravel driveway. The council's enforcers were early. "They're here," Roman murmured, more to himself than to her. He didn't turn around. He stayed with his back to her, a silhouette of absolute authority and agonizing hesitation. "Dante is convinced the signal came from this wing. If I don't give him a name, he'll take the whole house apart. He'll start with your room, Alara. He'll find the hidden floorboard. He'll find the ledger you think I don't know about." Alara's heart stopped. He had known. He had watched her for weeks, months perhaps, letting her believe she was clever while he gathered the rope to hang her with. This wasn't a discovery. It was a trap that had finally snapped shut. "I could have stopped you weeks ago," Roman said, finally turning to face her. His expression was a mask of cold stone, but his hand tightened on the back of a chair until his knuckles turned white. "I waited because I wanted to be wrong. I wanted you to prove that you weren't just another ghost sent to haunt me." The sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway outside, followed by a sharp, rhythmic knock on the study door. The door didn't open, not yet. Even Dante knew better than to enter Roman's inner sanctum without a command. But the pressure was mounting, a physical force vibrating through the floorboards. "10 minutes is up, Alara," Roman whispered, the shadows of the room seeming to lengthen behind him. "Tell me who is on the other end of that phone, or I open that door and let the wolves have what's left of you." The knock on the door came again, harder this time, a rhythmic demand for blood that vibrated through Alara's heels. She looked at Roman, and for a fleeting, delusional second, she searched for the man who had pressed her against the garden wall and whispered about a future far away from this smoke-filled life. But that man had been replaced by the boss. He stood like a monument to the Rossi legacy, his eyes unblinking, his silence a suffocating shroud. "There is no one on the other end, Roman," she said, her voice dropping to a steady, hollow pitch. It was the lie she had rehearsed in the mirror of a dozen safe houses, polished until it shone like truth. "I bought it for myself, a way to feel like I still had a world that didn't belong to you. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness, but it isn't a betrayal." She watched him process the words. He didn't believe her. They both knew it. But by offering him a lie he could theoretically defend to his men, she was testing whether his obsession with her outweighed his duty to the family. Outwardly, she remained soft, her shoulders slumped in a performance of defeated innocence. Inwardly, her mind was a cold, clicking machine. She mapped the distance from the desk to the letter opener, then to the side exit that led to the servants' stairs. If Roman opened that door and handed her over, she had exactly 4 seconds to bridge the gap and find a jugular. Roman let out a breath that sounded like a weary growl. He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her whole. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that felt more threatening than a blow. "You're a beautiful liar, Alara, but you're playing a game where the loser doesn't just walk away. If I tell Dante this story and he finds even a whisper of a connection to the feds or the Mortys, I won't just be losing a lover, I'll be losing my head." The power dynamic shifted again, a sickening tilt. He wasn't just protecting her, he was deciding if she was worth his own life. The stakes had transcended her survival and moved into the realm of total ruin. If Roman lied for her, he became her accomplice. He would be tethered to her treachery, and the Rossi empire would crumble from the inside out. "Open the door, Roman," she whispered, a daring gamble. "If you think I'm a threat, let them in. Let Dante do what he does best." It was a provocation designed to force his hand, and for a moment the mask slipped. A flash of raw, agonizing conflict crossed Roman's face. He looked at the silver phone on the desk, then at the door where his brother waited with a firing squad's patience. The silence between them wasn't peace, it was the breath before a plunge. He didn't move toward the door. Instead, he grabbed the burner phone and crushed it under the heel of his Italian leather boot. The crack of plastic and glass was as loud as a gunshot in the small room. He stepped over the wreckage, his face hardening into an expression of chilling resolve. "If you are lying to me," he said, his voice so low it was barely a ghost of a sound, "I will be the one who ends you. Not Dante, not the council, me." He turned toward the door, smoothing his vest and adjusting his cuffs, the image of the untouchable Dawn restored. He reached for the handle, his fingers hovering over the brass. Outside, the low murmur of men's voices grew hushed, sensing the climax. Alara tensed her muscles, ready to spring or scream, the silence of her survival finally reaching its breaking point. Roman didn't turn the handle. His hand remained curled over the brass, his knuckles white, as the ghost of another room, another night, bled into the present. The smell of the expensive tobacco in his study suddenly felt like the heavy, metallic scent of a rain-slicked alleyway in Palermo a decade ago. He remembered a girl, not Alara, but someone with the same defiant spark in her eyes, who had looked at him with that identical mix of terror and hope. He had been younger then, a soldier bound by his father's rigid code, and he had watched in silence as they dragged her into the dark for a crime she hadn't committed. He had chosen the family over a soul, and the silence of that choice had echoed in his head every night since. The memory hit him like a physical blow, breaking through the ice he had carefully cultivated. This was the same moment repeating, a cruel cycle of the Rossi bloodline demanding a sacrifice to prove its purity. If he opened this door now, he wasn't just letting Dante in, he was letting the past finish what it started. The power he held, the millions in the bank, the men waiting outside, it all felt like ash if it meant standing by while another woman was erased by the machinery of his own making. "Roman," Dante's voice muffled through the wood, sharp with suspicion. "The signal trace is pinpointed. We're losing the window to catch the handler. Open the door." Roman's gaze snapped back to Alara. She was still poised like a high-tension wire, ready to fight for her life with a letter opener. The sight of her, small, cornered, but refusing to break, shattered the last of his analytical distance. He realized with a terrifying clarity that his hesitation wasn't about the ledger or the burner phone. It was about the fact that he was willing to burn the empire to the ground if it meant she stayed alive. That realization was the most dangerous threat he had ever faced. It made him a liability to his own throne. He stepped away from the door, his movements no longer fluid but jagged with a sudden, desperate urgency. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing Alara by the arm, not to restrain her, but to pull her toward the shadows of the bookshelves. He pressed a hidden latch, and a section of the wall groaned open, revealing the narrow, dark throat of a passage built for escapes that were never supposed to be necessary. "If you go through there, there is no coming back," he hissed, his face inches from hers. The cold boss was gone, replaced by a man looking into the abyss. "Dante will know I let you go. The council will declare me unfit. They will hunt us both until there's nothing left but bone." "Roman, what are you doing?" she whispered, her mask finally slipping to reveal genuine shock. "I'm not watching it happen again," he snapped, the weight of 10 years of regret fueling the fire in his eyes. He shoved a heavy signet ring into her palm, the Rossi seal. "Take this. If you get to the docks, show it to a man named Lorenzo. He owes me a life. Now he's going to pay it back by saving yours." The door handle behind them rattled violently. Dante was losing patience. The sound of a shoulder hitting the wood followed. The wood groaned, the frame splintering. Roman looked at the door, then back at Alara, the stakes having shifted from a secret mission to a total, scorched earth war. He was committing treason against his own blood for a woman who might still be his executioner. "Run," he commanded, his voice a raw, jagged edge. "Because when I open that door, I have to be the man they expect me to be, and that man doesn't let anyone live." The door didn't splinter. It swung open with a controlled, terrifying grace as Roman stepped back into the center of the room, leaving the secret passage ajar by only a hair's breadth in the shadows. He didn't push Alara into the dark. He didn't force her hand. Instead, he stood between her and the threshold, a living shield who had suddenly ceased to be a warden. For the first time since she had entered his world, the suffocating grip of his ownership had been replaced by something far more volatile. An invitation to choose. Dante burst in, flanked by 2 enforcers whose hands were already hovering over the grips of their sidearms. The air in the study turned frigid. Dante's gaze darted from Roman's calm face to the crushed remains of the burner phone on the floor, and finally to Alara, who stood unnervingly still near the bookshelves. "The signal ended here, Roman," Dante spat, his face flushed with the heat of the hunt. "The tech guys tracked it to this specific coordinate. Move aside. We're taking her to the basement for a proper scan." Roman didn't move. He didn't reach for his weapon either. He simply adjusted his cufflink, a gesture of supreme, insulting indifference. "You're tracking ghosts, Dante. The signal you picked up was a decoy I planted weeks ago to test the perimeter security. It seems the only thing you've proven is that our encryption is leaking from the server room, not my study." It was a blatant, beautiful lie, a high-stakes gamble that put Roman's credibility directly on the chopping block. By claiming the signal as his own, he was tying his reputation to the very evidence that could hang Alara. He was protecting her, but he wasn't claiming her. He was giving her the space to breathe, to flee, or to stay, all while the wolves bared their teeth at his own throat. Dante stepped forward, his eyes narrowing until they were mere slits of black glass. "A decoy? You expect me to believe you've been playing games with the council's frequency while a mole is bleeding us dry. If you're lying for this girl, Roman, you're not just a fool, you're a target." "I am the head of this family," Roman said, his voice dropping to a frequency that made the glass decanters on the sideboard hum. "If I say it was a test, it was a test. If you want to challenge my methods, call a vote at the table. But until then, get out of my office before I decide your insubordination is the real threat to our security." The power dynamic in the room thrummed like a live wire. The enforcers shifted uncomfortably, looking between the 2 brothers. The hierarchy was being tested in real time. Roman was offering Alara a window, a few precious minutes where the eyes of the Rossi Empire were focused on his defiance rather than her movements. He was giving her the agency he had spent months stripping away, watching her out of the corner of his eye to see what she would do with a freedom that cost him everything. Dante hissed a breath through his teeth, the tension reaching a snapping point. "The council will hear about this, brother. They won't be as easily distracted by a pretty face and a clever story." He turned on his heel, gesturing for his men to follow. The heavy door slammed shut, the echo ringing through the mahogany-lined room like a tolling bell. Roman didn't turn around immediately. He stood looking at the closed door, his shoulders tense, the weight of his chosen treason beginning to settle. He had shielded her, but in doing so, he had stripped away the safety of his own shadow. "The passage is still open, Alara," he said, his voice weary and stripped of its iron. He didn't look back at her, refusing to use his presence to influence her next move. "The gate at the end leads to the North Woods. My men won't look there for another 20 minutes. You can go, or you can stay and face what's coming when my brother returns with a warrant I can't ignore. The choice is yours. I won't hold the door for you, and I won't lock it behind you." The passage beckoned like a dark, silent throat, promising a return to the world of shadows and handlers she understood. But as Alara looked at Roman's back, the broad, unyielding silhouette of a man who had just painted a bullseye on his own heart for her, the cold logic of her mission faltered. Trusting a man like Roman Rossi was a death sentence, yet for the first time, the danger didn't feel like a threat from without. It felt like a slow, burning transformation from within. She moved away from the shelves, her footsteps silent on the Persian rug. She didn't run for the passage. Instead, she stepped into the center of the room, standing in the wreckage of the burner phone. "If I go, they'll know for sure," she whispered. "Dante isn't looking for a signal anymore, Roman. He's looking for a reason to take your seat. If I vanish, I give it to him on a silver platter." Roman finally turned. The mask of the dawn was cracked, revealing a raw, jagged exhaustion. He looked at her not as a possession to be guarded, but as an equal in a sinking ship. "If you stay, you aren't just a guest. You're an accomplice. The council won't just ask questions, they'll use the pliers. My protection is a thin veil now, Alara. I've traded my leverage for your time." The weight of his admission crashed over her. By choosing to stay, she was yielding the last of her professional distance. To trust him was to admit that the mission, the ledger, the secrets, the extraction, mattered less than the man standing in front of her. It was a terrifying vulnerability. If she stayed, she wasn't just risking her life. She was risking her soul to a man whose hands were stained with the very blood she was supposed to be avenging. She reached out, her fingers brushing the fine wool of his sleeve. The contact felt like a spark in a powder keg. "I'm staying, not because I'm yours, but because I won't let you fall for a lie I told." The intensity in the room shifted from the threat of violence to the suffocating heat of a mutual pact. Roman's hand covered hers, his grip almost desperate. But the moment of connection was severed by the distant, rhythmic chime of the estate's security alarm, a low, pulsing thrum that signaled a breach of the inner perimeter. "They aren't waiting for the council," Roman said, his voice hardening as the boss returned, sharper and more lethal than before. "Dante has moved up the timeline. He's not coming back with a warrant, he's coming back with an execution order." The power dynamics had reached their final, lethal equilibrium. There was no longer a hierarchy of boss and subordinate, or predator and prey. There were only two people trapped in a room with a single exit and an army of men who viewed their bond as a terminal infection. The cost of her trust was no longer a theoretical consequence. It was the sound of boots echoing in the hallway again, faster this time, and the metallic slide of a round being chambered just outside the door. Alara felt the cold dread settle into her marrow. She had chosen to trust him, and in doing so, she had ensured that whatever happened next, they would burn together. The heavy thud of a battering ram against the reinforced hallway doors echoed like a funeral bell through the study. It wasn't just Dante's men anymore. The distinctive, rhythmic precision of the council's black site enforcers had joined the fray. Roman's decision to shield Alara had sent a ripple through the Rossi infrastructure, a seismic shift that his enemies were already exploiting. By choosing her, he had signaled a crack in the iron foundation of the family, and the vultures were descending to widen it. Roman crossed to the ornate fireplace, reaching behind the mantel to retrieve a heavy, black tactical case. "The moment I claimed that signal as mine, I handed them the keys to my kingdom," he said, his voice devoid of regret but sharp with the reality of their situation. "They don't care about the truth anymore. They care about the precedent. A Don who chooses a woman over the code is a Don who has already abdicated." He tossed a compact handgun to Alara. She caught it instinctively, her grip sure and practiced, a detail that in any other moment would have triggered a fresh wave of interrogation. Now, it was simply a necessity for survival. The power dynamic had been stripped of its nuance. They were no longer playing a game of cat and mouse. They were two targets bound by a mutual death warrant. "My bank accounts were frozen 3 minutes ago," Roman continued, checking the magazine of his own weapon. The safe houses are being compromised as we speak. This isn't a domestic dispute, Alara. This is a corporate takeover by way of assassination. The intrusion of his world into their private war was total. A flashbang detonated in the corridor, the shockwave rattling the crystal glasses on the sideboard until they shattered. Through the narrow slit of the study door, Alara saw the red laser dots of snipers dancing across the mahogany panels. The stakes had transcended their secrets. The Rossi name was being scrubbed from the city in real time, and she was the catalyst for the purge. "They're using you to get to me," she said, the realization bitter on her tongue. "If I wasn't here, you could still negotiate. You could still fix this." Roman stepped toward her, his hand briefly cupping the back of her neck, pulling her forehead to his. The scent of gunpowder and rain was overwhelming. "If you weren't here, I'd be sitting in this room alone, waiting for a bullet I deserved 10 years ago. Now I have something worth killing for." The door groaned as a second breach attempt began. The wood began to splinter, revealing the tactical gear of the men outside. This was the cost of his intervention. His power was no longer a shield for her. It was the very thing drawing the fire. Every asset he had spent a lifetime acquiring, his loyalty, his fear, his men, was being turned against them because he had dared to make his protection personal. "We have one chance," Roman whispered, his eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, terminal clarity. "The passage leads to the sub-level garage, but they know about it now. We don't go out as a ghost and her captor. We go out as the reason this city burns." The door erupted inward in a spray of splinters and smoke. The silence was over. The invisible protection Roman had offered was gone, replaced by the loud, violent reality of a war that would either cement their bond or bury them in the ruins of the Rossi estate. The smoke from the door's breach curled around Roman like a living thing, a gray shroud for a dying empire. He stood in the center of the room, weapon raised, his body a deliberate barrier between the encroaching strike team and Alara. The air was a cacophony of shouting voices, the rhythmic thud of boots, and the high-pitched whine of tactical comms. This was the moment where the cold logic of the dawn should have taken over. The Rossi playbook was clear. Cut the dead weight, retreat through the secondary tunnel, and regroup with the loyalist factions in the north. Survival was the only law. But as he glanced back at Alara, whose knuckles were white as she gripped the handgun he'd given her, the playbook felt like a script for a man he no longer recognized. To leave her was to survive. To stay was to invite the finality of a guttering candle. He could hear Dante's voice outside, barking orders to clear the room, a command that held no room for prisoners. The council hadn't just authorized a takeover, they had authorized a scrubbing. "Roman, go," Alara urged, her voice barely audible over the splintering of the inner foyer doors. "You know the routes better than I do. If you stay, they kill the head of the family. If you leave, you're still a king in exile. You can fight back from the shadows." He didn't move. The liability of his love for her wasn't a weight. It was an anchor that had finally stopped his drift into nihilism. "A king without a soul is just a ghost with a crown, Alara," he said, his voice a low, terrifyingly calm anchor amidst the chaos. "I spent a decade retreating. I'm done running from the shadows of the men I'm supposed to lead." The first tactical light swept into the room, a blinding white spear of LED brilliance. Roman fired twice, the recoil absorbed by his steady frame with a practiced ease that spoke of 1,000 such nights. But this wasn't a skirmish, it was an execution. A spray of submachine gun fire chewed through the mahogany desk, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. The choice was no longer about strategy, it was about the fundamental nature of his power. If he retreated alone, he remained the Dawn, but he lost the only person who had seen the man beneath the scars. If he stayed, he gambled the entire Rossi legacy on a desperate, narrow escape through a garage he knew was likely swarming with Dante's hitters. Every second he spent protecting her was a second the council used to solidify their coup. He was watching his life's work disintegrate in real time, traded for the chance to see her breathe for one more hour. "You're choosing a suicide pact over a throne," she cried out, ducking as a bullet shattered the marble bust behind her. "I'm choosing a life over a tomb," Roman countered. He grabbed her hand, his grip a searing promise of shared fate. He didn't lead her to the back exit. He led her toward the primary hallway, straight into the teeth of the storm. It was a move so reckless, so contrary to every instinct of a mafia boss, that it caught the first wave of enforcers off guard. He wasn't acting like a man with a plan. He was acting like a man with nothing left to lose but the woman at his side. The power he wielded was no longer institutional. It was raw, personal, and devastatingly focused. But as they reached the threshold of the study, the red laser dots converged on his chest, a dozen silent promises of a fast end. Roman stepped into the light, shielding her with his own mass, testing whether the men who once feared him would still pull the trigger on a god who had chosen to be mortal. The hallway was a tunnel of strobe lights and sulfurous smoke, a concrete throat ready to swallow them both. Roman stood at the center of the threshold, his body a living barricade. The laser sights danced across his white shirt like a swarm of red hornets, focusing on his heart, his throat, his eyes. He didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his weapon to point at the men in the shadows. He simply stood there, his hand still locked in Alara's, his fingers entwined with hers in a way that felt less like a grip and more like a bridge. For months, Alara had lived in a state of perpetual tension, her muscles coiled for the inevitable moment he would turn on her, use her, or discard her. She had braced for the impact of his power, waiting for the heavy hand of the dawn to crush the life out of her secrets. But as the seconds ticked by and Roman refused to step into the safety of the dark passage behind them, the bracing finally stopped. The internal armor she had worn since the day she took this assignment crumbled. He wasn't staying because he owned her. He was staying because he had made a choice that had nothing to do with the family and everything to do with her. Dante, Roman's voice didn't shake. It carried the absolute, terrifying authority of a man who had already accepted his own death. You want the chair? Take it. You want the accounts? They're yours. But you step through this door and you're not just killing a brother. You're killing the only man who knows where the offshore ledgers are buried. The red dots flickered. The heavy boots of the enforcers stalled. The greed of the syndicate was the only thing more powerful than their bloodlust, and Roman was playing on it with the surgical precision of a grandmaster. He was bartering his life's work, his history, and his future for a few feet of hallway and a chance for Alara to move without a bullet in her back. Alara looked up at him, the profile of his face etched in the harsh, tactical light. The coldness was gone, replaced by a devastating, quiet resolve. In that moment, the power dynamic that had defined their relationship, the boss and the spy, the king and the captive, evaporated. They were just two people in a burning house, and he was the only thing keeping the roof from falling on her. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. She stopped trying to pull him toward the exit and instead stepped up beside him, her own weapon leveled at the darkness. She wasn't bracing for the impact of his world anymore. She was part of it. "I know," Roman murmured, his thumb grazing her knuckles. The silence that followed was the most dangerous kind, the kind that precedes a landslide. Dante stepped into the light, his face a mask of frustrated rage, his gun leveled directly at Roman's forehead. The siblings stood 10 feet apart, the throne of the Rossi Empire sitting invisible between them, now slick with the betrayal of both. "You're a liability, Roman," Dante said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "The council doesn't care about the ledgers as much as they care about the rot, and she is the rot." Roman didn't move to protect himself. He moved slightly to the left, further obscuring Alara from Dante's line of sight. It was an act of pure, unadulterated sacrifice. He was offering himself as the primary target, giving her the split second she would need to fire or flee when the lead started flying. The stakes had reached their zenith. There was no more room for calculation or delay. There was only the choice he had made to stay, and the choice she had made to let him.